Como é o sotaque brasileiro? Qual é a forma mais óbvia de identificar um brasileiro quando está falando inglês? Ou pronunciar vogais demais, tipo internet, ou tirar as vogais que deve pronunciar, tipo cough, em vez de coffee. É isso que vamos falar hoje no canal Amigo Gringo. Se você não está inscrito no canal, inscreva-se, deixe seu like e, mais importante ainda, quem fala internet, compartilhe esse vídeo com eles. Hoje vamos falar com um professor do Cambly, o Dan, que vocês já conhecem de outro vídeo que a gente fez, ele é bem legal. Ele é canadense morando no México. E para quem não sabe, Cambly é essa plataforma que te conecta com professores de inglês falantes nativos 24 horas por dia, 7 dias por semana, no computador, no celular, no tablet, e você ou pode programar uma aula com um professor favorito, como talvez o Dan vai ser depois desse vídeo, ou entrar em qualquer hora e ser conectado com um professor fluente, nativo. E se você quer provar Cambly por 15 minutos, uma aula de 15 minutos de graça totalmente, usa o código aqui ou o link na descrição para pegar esses 15 minutos de graça e talvez conversar com o Dan. Olha, eu já gravei a aula do Dan, vamos voltar no tempo e assistir essa aula agora.
Hey, Seth, what's up?
Hey, Dan, great to see you again. Thanks for coming back on Amigo Gringo. Just introduce yourself for whoever might not have met you the first time.
My name is Dan. I'm from Toronto, Canada, but I've got 12 years right here in Cuernavaca, Mexico.
Great. Well, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to eat before our talk, so I'm just having my typical American breakfast of a cough and chickitaki. You know what I'm talking about?
No, maybe I don't know about as much about America as I thought.
Cough
Ah,
and chickitaki.
I understand now, but I think you mean coffee and Tic Tacs.
Yes, I do. And I apologize to the Brazilians out there. I'm exaggerating a Brazilian accent and a common error because that's what I want to talk about today. Word endings. And Dan is really an expert at teaching pronunciation. We're going to talk about a bunch of things with word endings, but I want to start with that so distinctive Brazilian habit of adding a syllable, usually an E sound, to the end of words, and sometimes changing the consonant as well. So chiquitaki is an example of adding an E. It should we say what?
Tic Tacs. Tic Tacs.
Tacs or Tic Tacs. And they say tiki taki or chiquitaki, depending on what part of Brazil. But even more interesting is when a word ends in a T. For example, how do Brazilians say internet?
I guess internet or internetchi, depending on where they're from.
Again, sometimes it's internet-y, but it's also common to change that T into what we think is a CH sound. So it sounds funny to us. Internet-chi. And so I guess in a way, there's 3 different mistakes. Some people just say internet-ch, and they change the sound. Some people add internet-chi, and then there's even a more subtle mistake if they say internet. Teach me how to pronounce that word internet correctly if I weren't a native speaker. For example, you have a cat, which sometimes is behind you. They're not there now. But
no, they're gone.
Your cat or catchy or cat.
The letter T in English is very difficult. It's difficult for people of many languages, not just Portuguese. It's a very common letter, and typically if you put it at the beginning of a word, it is like a t sound, and to make this you have your tongue up high touching the roof of your mouth, and it kind of snaps down, and you're not using your voice, you're just using air. So
Air.
okay, So typically words that begin with the letter T have this strong, the traditional T sound, the t, t, t. And if you put your hand in front of your mouth like this and go t, 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 you can feel like a little puff of air, like when you go to the eye doctor, that puff of air in your eye. And if you put your hand here and you make t, 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 you should feel nothing. There's no vibration because you're not using your voice.
No vibration. Got it.
Okay. For no vibration. That's right. Now T in the middle of a word, often because we're kind of lazy, at least North American English, we pronounce it like a D. We say party. We don't say party, we say party. And we don't say pretty, we say pretty. And we don't say computer, we say computer, just because it's easier and we're lazy. Now T at the end is a little bit difficult. Often we don't really hear it, but it's not silent. For example, I say I have a cat and a dog.
Cat.
I don't say I have a cat and a dog, because cat and a dog, it sounds kind of unnatural, and also your mouth has to get in that position, cat and a dog. So I have a cat and a dog. Now,
even would be hard for a Brazilian for some Brazilians to say cat alone.
Cat
or
cat.
catch.
Most people say cat. If you say cat, okay? Now you can almost think of it as if you're just about to say this word, and just as you're about to make the t sound, somebody covers your mouth, okay?
Right.
So instead of saying cat, you say cat. Yeah, I have a cat.
Internet.
I have a cat. Internet, not internet. Internet.
Not to take a small break from what we're talking about, but it's winter in New York, and I have the window open because it's hot in my apartment. You are in Mexico,
and I'm wearing a heavy jacket. Yeah,
because it's cold.
Yeah, That's figure.
Strange. It's because, of course, your house is not ready for the cold weather.
My house is 100% concrete.
Yeah, concrete, not concrete.
Not concrete. Concrete. And if you notice, I didn't say concrete. I said concrete.
Right.
The T is, you could think of it, the T is like a ghost. It's not silent, because if it was silent, it would be concrete. And it's not concrete, it's concrete. Like a sudden, like slamming the brakes on your car before you hit the T.
Right.
Concrete, not concrete.
Got it. So you have ticky-tacky, which is tick. It's the same thing, tick-tack. And I think one of the reasons this is so hard for Brazilians is that there are very few consonants that Portuguese words end in, right? So most Portuguese words end in vowels, O, A, E. But some end with S, like a plural sound ends with an S, and some end with R, like a verb, an infinitive of a verb. Falar, for to speak. But besides that, basically no words end in consonants. Even when a word ends in an L or an M in Portuguese, the pronunciation is a vowel. Sal for salt. Falam for they speak. So really almost all words in Portuguese end with a vowel, which I think must be why people get confused. So look out for foreign words that end in consonants.
We don't say tic-tac. It's tic-tac. Again, with this, or slamming on the brakes, or the ghost sound, or whatever you want to hear. Now, again, it's not silent. It's not a silent C. It's not tit-tat. It's tic-tac. It's that really sudden stop.
It's just something you probably have to practice and practice and practice. The most important thing is don't add the syllable E at the end.
Yeah, never add a syllable when a word ends in a consonant. Vowels produce syllables, not consonants.
But for example, sometimes it's the opposite problem with Brazilians. So the thing that drives me nuts is I spend all this time telling Brazilians not to pronounce E at the end of the word, but then there's words in English that have an E sound at the end of a word. Coffee. And it's very common for Brazilians to say cough, which is tosse, not coffee. Movie. Instead of move, they often will say move. And then I hear this all the time when they're talking about a guard
at an airport or something. They say, yeah, secure it. Secure it. No, it's security. So how can we tell when we need to pronounce the E at the end of a word? Or the E sound, I should say.
Yeah, in most cases, I think in all cases, if a word ends in the combination of consonant and E, the E is silent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If it ends, I guess, in a double consonant like coffee, movie, then it's a syllable. Then it produces a syllable because only vowels produce syllables. Consonants, maybe with some exceptions, consonants don't produce syllables.
2 vowels makes a syllable. I think that's right.
Generally, yeah.
Let's just review that. 2 vowels at the end of a word, like EE or IE, create a syllable that you must pronounce. And then consonant Y also creates a syllable.
Yep, and in that case, that's because the Y acts as a vowel. For example, you could say university. Now, you notice I didn't say university, university, almost like a D sound. But university, in that case, the Y really acts as a vowel. It's like, you could say it's a double E sound.
And it's very, very common for Brazilians to say universities. Just to refresh my memory, the final vowel, if a word ends in an E, that does not become a syllable. That does not change the word. H-A-T is hat, and H-A-T-E is hat also.
Not true. This is another crazy English thing. A silent E, when a word ends in consonant plus E, the E, I think, is always silent. The reason why so many words in English, not all, but so many end in a silent E is because the E doesn't produce a syllable or a sound, but it does have a purpose. And its purpose is that it modifies the vowel that comes before the consonant. So, for example, in the words you just said, hat, H-A-T, if you add the E on the end of the word, it becomes hate. Why? Because, like I said, that E modifies the sound of the A. So it makes it from an A to an A, all right?
Okay.
And if we go to E, the letter E, all right, it would be pet and Pete.
Pete, the name, the nickname.
Okay.
Peter.
Right. Or, concrete. The reason that word is not concrete, we as English speakers, we just naturally know that it's not concrete. Why? Because it has an E on the end. If that E did not exist in the word concrete, it would be pronounced concrete.
Concrete.
Concrete, not concrete. If you remove the E, it would be concrete, which is not a word. So
that's pretty much a general rule.
Yeah, there are some again exceptions. People say, well, what about Nike? And that's not an English word. I think that's a Greek word. A better word is bike for bicycle. We don't say bikey, we say bike. But Nike, and also it's a product, it's a brand. That's a little bit different.
It's some god, right? By the way, your cat just appeared.
Are you sure it's not my catch or my catchy?
Not your catch. You could catch your cat. You could pegar seu gato. I also noticed that your cat is very cute.
That's a good one. Yeah. If you remove the letter E from cute, you're left with cut, which is actually different in 2 ways. The U goes from an and cut. It's to cute. It's actually the sound of a Y to U. Cute. Now, continuing with the vowels to go from I, the letter I, we can say pin, and if you add a letter E on the end, it becomes pine. Okay, so pin, the sound is I, and pine, the sound is I, just the same name as the letter. And O, we've got not, and if you add an E, it becomes note. So it changes the O, the silent E modifies the O to go from and not to O, not note.
Not note. So instead of not meaning no, like negativo, it becomes note, like nota. I want to say one final thing before we wrap up, and that's that I notice it must be confusing to people that when you're stressing, really showing how to pronounce, for example, not, you do say not with the puff of air, but when you're being more casual, you say not. And that's just not the way English is. And I think for Brazilians, if you're really talking about the word, like you're explaining what does not mean, then you pronounce it all out. But almost always, if you're just having a conversation, you say na.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yep, perfect.
Right. So Brazilians, if you want to use your free 15 minutes on Cambly to speak to Dan, how do they find you, Dan, online?
You can find me on Cambly. My name on Cambly is Dan CA, and a lot of people ask me, they say, hello, Danka. The CA it's because I'm from Canada. It's not my name, but Dan CA, that's me.
By the way, Dan, not D, which is how you would pronounce that in Portuguese.
Okay.
All right, Dan, thanks so much. It was great to talk to you. Hope to
Always good to see you, Seth.